Okay.
Okay, let's start. So sorry for being slightly late, but the good news is after us is just the lunch break and you're probably already all fed up. So welcome, great to be on a full room here today. My name is Kai Kreuzer. I'm working for Deutsche Telekom in the Connected Home department, doing all kind of smart home stuff. And I'm also the project lead of the Eclipse SmartHome project. Now, today I'm not presenting any of the usual smart home introduction, what is the project all about and so on, but I'm rather having just a co-talk part right here, because the really fun stuff is done by Michael. That's why I brought him here.
Hey guys, my name is Michael. I presented another session yesterday about something I do for work, and this is something I've done for fun. I think it's very important that in everything we do we have a lot of fun. We heard that at the keynote yesterday, right? From the NASA guys who didn't have enough fun and blew up the space shuttle and all. So this is a presentation about something we've done. Just want to share with you something we think is pretty cool. Let's see what you guys think.
Go ahead.
You guys all know that the internet was invented to distribute cat videos, right? All this Facebook and all this stuff, that was just an afterthought. This cat here is riding on a Rover, and that's actually him, right here in front of you. And I wanted to explain to you how this came about. This Rover is actually very strongly related to EclipseCon. At EclipseCon France 6 months ago, Gaël Blondel from Polarsys handed me this because I had to answer some questions correctly in a contest. I think there were some Eclipse-related questions. And somehow I got it right and won this Rover. So I took it home and landed at home and gave the Rover to my daughter and said, hey, some conference tech thing, I got this gadget and you can play with it. And she gave it right back to me. She said like, but Papa, this thing doesn't have remote control and what is this? I can't do anything with this. And only then I understood that this was a Rover kit. So I actually just got this white chassis and a Raspberry Pi with it, which needed to be assembled, which sounded like a fun thing to do. I was sort of obliged almost to build something out of it, and have been meaning to find an excuse to build something cool with a Raspberry Pi for a while anyway. So this sounded like a great opportunity for that. A couple of experiences, before we jump into the demo and show you moving, flashing things, a couple of experiences of how it is to work with hardware platforms. So something that struck me as not having worked much with hardware before is that while we're all used to working with software, and I think for many of us in the room here, debugging and finding issues in software is our daily bread, I was surprised to have to go to a foreign barren planet where there was interesting challenges, and I'll say that led me to have some fun. So I didn't really expect that after having coded something and having tried this out and it not working, spending quite a bit of time on looking through the code, because that's our world, right? We're coming from code. After realizing that actually why it didn't work was because on the Raspberry Pi I got from Gaël at EclipseCon France, the USB controller was fried. So it was a working Raspberry Pi with somehow the USB and the GPIO controller not working. So that took a while, got a new Raspberry Pi, retried, with that it finally worked, but you sort of don't even expect as a software developer, you sort of trust the hardware, right? On your laptops, we work and we code our Java stuff, and we work at a different level, so that was an interesting challenge. Another thing is this Wi-Fi business. So the Raspberry Pi 3 has a built-in Wi-Fi card. That worked for a while, and then I started mounting things together, and it stopped working. It was like, what did I do? How could I have broken the Wi-Fi? And that was because the motor shield, the board that's mounted on top of the Raspberry Pi 3 here, which controls the motors of the Rover, interferes with the built-on Wi-Fi of the Raspberry Pi. The external Wi-Fi dongle solves that. You can work around all of these things once you figure them out, but they're sort of fun to work with real hardware. Another thing is interference on the pin layout, so the sound. We're showing it to you here with Sonos loudspeaker because that's better for a presentation, but also because the sound on the Raspberry Pi is on the same pins as the motors. Long story short, it's fun to work with hardware. We set this up as access point. The Rover actually offers a wireless access point And Kai will come back to this and mention why this is an autonomous system. We don't connect to the internet. We're not on the conference Wi-Fi. So basically, there's a Open Hub running on this Raspberry Pi, connected to a switch over here that controls these devices. You'll hear more about this in a minute. What's actually running now on the software side, after having complained about the hardware? There's sort of 3 layers. To control Raspberry pins, there's a library called Pi4j that is, I think, the most widely used to talk to hardware. So Pi4j is basically a library that you can, through a Java API, switch a certain pin to input or to output. And you can set it to high, you can set it to low. That's the first step. This is an existing library that you can come across. And if you ever wanted to go home and tinker with a Raspberry Pi and this Pi4j, it's a good starting point for that. What I've built on top of that is a driver for the Rover. So I built this library, it's up on GitHub if any of you wants to do something like this, where you get a sort of a turtle-like API. So you can say, Rover move forward, turn 45 degrees right, and in order to make this usable by, what we'll just see in the next step, Open Hub, the API in this driver layer has sort of a synchronous and asynchronous take to it, so you can make it move forward and wait until it's moved, or you can just send it a bunch of commands that will execute. Have a look at this if you're interested in this.
Do you want to show that?
I could show this real quick, yeah, because actually there is a small app here.
Could switch to get a bit closer to the Rover, maybe?
I don't know if you guys can all see the Rover from the back. But
yeah, because here, so for the ones who can't see it from the back, that's the little Rover here.
Right, and there is a web app on the phone, which basically allows me to control this Rover. So this is an HTML page.
Most of the time.
Which most of the time makes it move. Voilà.
Okay.
Yeah, we can move back and forth.
Don't fall off the table,
yeah,
please.
Yeah, careful. Okay.
Careful. Okay.
I think we'll stop there. So you guys get that there's a sort of a direct driver here that has a little HTTP server built in with an HTML page that allows us to control that. Now.
Right, and then on a very nice sunny summer day, I came to visit Michael, and he was so proud of his achievements having this Rover running around there. So it actually had to withdraw the hard Swiss weather conditions here, and even had to endure my 3 kids that I had along me that played with that Rover until the battery was empty.
I really liked it.
But yeah, for sure. But I told Michael, well, that Rover actually reminds me of the Lego Mindstorm stuff that I presented last year here at EclipseCon with our smart home integration. And the people who know me know that I have to connect all such gadgets and devices to open up to Eclipse SmartHome. So I told Michael, hey, well, it shouldn't be too hard to actually connect that as well to Eclipse SmartHome, build a binding for that, and make that thing bit more fun with more functionality to connect it to different things and use the nice features of Eclipse SmartHome.
Right, and so that was an opportunity to say, I've known Kai for many years. I was like, okay, Open Hub and Eclipse SmartHome, and so how exactly does this work? What do you do here to tie in the new device, and sort of started digging at this a little bit. And I discovered, as those of you who are users of SmartHome and Open Hub will know, that there's this binding concept. So a binding exposes a device, and it was actually very easy to write a new binding. So Kai put together a Maven archetype that you can instantiate, and then it creates this scaffold skeleton project. There's some documentation up on these links here, and essentially I implemented one class. There's a Rover robot handler in this 3rd layer. So I spoke to you earlier about the Pi4j lower level library, my Rover driver, mid-level jar, and then the Open Hub binding Rover robot, in which this Rover robot handler class basically translates commands from smart home API, so you've got things and commands, into the Vorburger Raspberry Motors API. So this class essentially takes a command from Open Hub and then makes the Rover do things. Very easy to implement, and very productive way of tying things into this ecosystem.
So, want to show that again?
So what this led to is, what this led to is that from the app that you remember here, which is an HTML app, I can switch over to Open Hub's Android app. And what we see here is a sitemap in OpenHAB that has a few buttons. For example, we now have a Rover forward command. We can control this rover like this, make him turn around. That was really easy to do.
And you also now have additional features that are built in the app right out of the box, right? Like NFC support, for example.
Yeah, that was really cool. That was really cool. So the OpenHAB Android app has an NFC connection. So this Sonos box here has an NFC tag on top of it.
This little one there.
Put this phone on top of the Sonos box, the rover starts moving forward. Right? And this is basically for free thanks to OpenHAB.
So does this mean you could control the rover now from work? Is this also like remote integrated something, or?
Well, we're offline here, not on the internet.
But if it was connected?
Yes, if it was connected, you can, of course, remotely access that.
Like if you have the webcam and
Yeah.
Nanny cam and all of this fun stuff.
So, right, from that moment on, we actually worked together on that project, on this conference talk here, and actually we are living 500 kilometers away from each other, so we had to remotely collaborate, and on software stuff, that is always easy. On hardware, it isn't that easy. So we were using Hangout to discuss things and to do, but actually the whole setup was good luck for me, but bad luck for Michael, because he owned the rover, he had the hardware at home, so I was only telling him what to do, and he had to figure it out and make it work in the end.
You had some of the other hardware that we wanted to tie together. That was really fun.
Yeah.
Some hardware here, some hardware there.
Just for those of you that don't know Eclipse SmartHome and what it's about in the end, so just a very, very brief mention of what it tries to achieve. So it's really a framework written in Java using OSGi for modularity to allow local connections to all kinds of devices that are out there for the smart home. And one of the core principles is the Hollywood principle, don't call us, we call you. It means that for adding hardware support for Eclipse SmartHome, you don't have to adapt your hardware with adapting the firmware, doing some special protocol in that, but it's the other way around. You're just enhancing Eclipse SmartHome, writing a small binding that you can then connect to your proprietary protocol systems and so on. The other important aspect of Eclipse SmartHome is that it really tries to do the local integration and not a cloud-based integration of all your different devices. And that this is actually a good idea to achieve reliability for a smart home solution. You could have experienced last week, not sure if you're familiar with that image that was from last Friday to Saturday night, the internet outage map after the distributed denial of service attack. And I guess many cloud-based smart home solutions went pretty quiet during that time. And there weren't any lights, any heating systems being controlled anymore. So yeah, the big advantage here is to say, if you're local or you're really using it there, you're not dependent on cloud services, at least not for the bare functionality that you really need in a smart home context. And for me, and that's why I always say the IoT is not the Internet of Things, but for me it means really the intranet of things. Now, what I want to show here today is a little bit what has been developed in the past months on Eclipse SmartHome, and which is a pretty neat combination with a rover here, and this is all around audio and voice support features. So we've introduced in the framework a kind of audio stream handling mechanism where you can have audio sources and audio sinks that pass on audio streams to each other in a very flexible way that you can decide on what kind of rule you want to have something passed which way. An audio source can be, well, a microphone input, it can be an MP3 file or on your file system. It could also be produced by a text-to-speech engine by just giving in a string and you get an audio stream out of that. And this then can be passed to audio sinks, which can be just your local line out. But it could be also, well, remote speakers that you can connect to. And you can also have such audio streams being processed again in software to actually make some text out of that again. So if you consider a microphone as an input, then you want to recognize what people say to you and make some sense out of that. And what you get from a speech-to-text engine is first really the prosa text that was recognized. So one additional important component that we introduced is the so-called human language interpreter, which really takes a string and tries to make sense in the way that it can trigger then actions, saying switching some devices, or also replying back to you with some other text. So this is more or less a core component of also all the new kind of personal assistants like Google Assistant with the chatting. So it doesn't have to be really voice-driven. It can be also text-based, like a chat or a Twitter feed that you pass and make something from that. Now, regarding the implementations that have been done so far for text-to-speech, there's an implementation that uses the macOS built-in text-to-speech engine, which is of very high quality. For pure Java, there's a project from the academic world called MaryTTS, which is pretty good in producing results. And there are also cloud-based offers like Voice RSS, where you're just sending a string via HTTP and you're getting an MP3 stream back from that. For speech-to-text, the other way around, it's a bit more complicated because you really need usually a lot of processing power and huge data of voice samples to really get to good results. So many implementations here are usually cloud-based. But there are also ways to get that working offline. So there's an open source project called Pocket Strings, which works quite well on simple vocabulary, at least, even on a Raspberry Pi. For here, we're actually using the offline version of the Google voice recognition that is built into the Android app itself then. So that's also completely working offline, recognizing it through the microphone and getting a string out of that. For the human language interpretation, Eclipse SmartHome comes with a basic implementation for some standard home automation controls like switching lights, playing music. But you can also plug in your own implementation of such an interpreter for domain-specific use cases, like if you want to control a Rover, for example. Regarding the audio syncs, I was then considering, okay, what can we use here also for the demo? The very first idea is to say, well, okay, you have a Java sound API, so you're just using the local sound output of the device, which would mean here that it's coming out from the line out of the Raspberry Pi, which is not really convenient. And the second problem with that was what Michael briefly mentioned before, that actually the GPIO ports, if they are used, they are blocking then somehow the sound playing of that. So it's not a good combination. So I came up with another great idea, which is Google Chromecast. And I have a Chromecast audio device, the one that you see in the picture here. And that's pretty neat because it hooks up to your Wi-Fi and it has an audio jack and you can play your audio anywhere around. So I implemented all that on audio sync support for Chromecast, worked pretty well. And then after a while we tested that and it came out that once you're completely offline and the Chromecast doesn't have internet access anymore, it stops working. And that although you're playing local audio streams, so we're passing a URL to a local URL in the network, everything's fine, but this bloody damn device wants to tell Google what you're playing, and otherwise it stops working if it can't do that. So that's why I synced that sync right there, and had to come up with yet another option, which was then the Sonos speaker. So Sonos are connected speakers, they also hook up to your Wi-Fi, and you can pass there also URLs to play stuff. And this is really working nicely in an offline way as well. And that's what we've hooked up here. The only problem with such a Sonos speaker is that they are quite expensive, so not everybody owns one. And I didn't have one. In that case, I had that, he didn't, so how should he be able to test now stuff? That wasn't easy either, so I had to come up with a fourth version of playing some sound. And yeah, that was actually then fairly easy and nice one to simply say, well, you can use a web browser that is open and that is accessing a UI on the Rover to simply tell it to play a certain audio stream from a URL. So that was then a way, if you have some UI open, that you can use that as an audio sync as well. And with that, we had these 4 implementations that are all now available, and yeah, Sonos being used here. So coming to the demo setup, as we said, the idea is to have the Rover as the Wi-Fi access point and all the different devices hooked up to that. So we have the smartphone hooked up, the computer, the Sonos speaker, and for any home automation talk, you of course need a light that you can switch. So I also brought a light bulb here, which is a Wi-Fi enabled bulb. So this can again be controlled through the Wi-Fi network. Now you might wonder why, after all, this Raspberry Pi has an Ethernet cable attached to that. And that actually just came half an hour ago to it, because we noticed that here in the conference building are so many SSIDs from the Wi-Fis that the access point on the Raspberry Pi didn't really come up anymore. It complained and didn't really work, so none of that stuff connected. So we did a kind of range extender through that Ethernet cable and connected it to a router that now serves as our access point.
But we swear it worked at home.
For sure. Okay, so that's the setup, and I think then we can go to the demo. Maybe just to show that setup, this is the UI, so-called paper UI, which works as the administration console, and on the configuration things we see actually here the 3 things are connected. So the Color 1000 is the light bulb from LifeX, the Rover robot, the Sonos speaker, all hooked up, being online and available here. So let's switch back to the camera, and Michael, I would say you should now try and talk to your Rover, please.
Let's see. This sounds amazing. I mean, all of these new features in OpenHub with voice recognition, voice output, and let's see if we can do something with this. I'm going to just move it back a little bit. Actually, I can do it like this. So perhaps we'll just start with an introduction. Let's say, hello, Rover.
Hello, EclipseCon. How are you guys today?
So there's some latency because it actually has to first wait if the speaker is really done with what he says, and then I think this Android sometimes tries to check whether it's online and get some better results from the online version before it falls back to the offline version. Okay, so, but it speaks to you.
Let's see if we can keep the conversation going and use this for a few more tricks. We're doing good. How are you?
It used to be shorter.
I'm great. Ask me to do something.
So you mentioned something about language interpreter, right?
Yeah.
A few commands I think that we had prepared there. Rover, please move forward. Right.
Oh, it moves. Yay! Yeah, so let's try something more useful. So we brought that light. So I'm always lazy. I'm not turning lights myself. Tell it to do it, please.
Let's see. You mean like a real home automation use case, not just toys. Let's see. Hey, Rover, turn on the light, please.
Okay.
Okay, there we go.
Coming to the light. Turning. And switch the light on.
Okay, but there's one very big problem with that. You know, I'm actually working for Deutsche Telekom, and
Right.
that's why I prefer the light pink.
Sure, no problem.
Ah, there we go. I could have said magenta, but it never understands my accent. That's why I prefer pink in that case.
Right, so I
All
think we
right.
had one last thing.
Yeah, that almost looks like a disco, so we should make him dance, right?
I think he's getting ready
How
for the
about
party
that?
tonight. I think
Yeah,
the Rover is
yeah,
sort of-
he will join the party for sure.
I think so.
Hey Rover, dance now.
Only if you say please.
Oh no. Well, let's be more polite to it. How did you do
Well
that?
brought up.
Okay, little Rover, would you please dance? So, Michael actually planned to do a cool choreography around the dance and try to scan notes to transform that to the right moves. And I told him, forget about that. We're at a developer conference. They all dance like that. Okay, so just to show you briefly how that works in the backend, so what we set up here, and mainly of how the voice recognition is done. So if you look here at the services, we have a Rover interpreter, which is our domain-specific human language interpreter. And this is actually done in a very easy way. So you see the configuration here. I can make that a little bigger. So for example, here the value hi, hello, hey. So if any of these words turns up in the recognized string, it will send the command greet to the binding, and then the binding can react and do something about that. It's also a bit more advanced. You can say, well, if there is go or move and a back, then send a back command to the Rover. So you can more or less try to parse the recognized string for certain keywords, say this has to be in there or that, and this for sure. And so this way it's really easy implementation of such a human language interpreter with just a specific configuration that we were now easy to adapt to make these use cases work. And with that, Michael, I think we're really at the end.
Pretty much at the end. We're done. We hope that you enjoyed our demo. You learned something new about Open Hub. We had a lot of fun putting it together. If this inspired you to go home and do something fun with hardware or in software, remember, it's important to have fun. Otherwise, spaceships blow up. Don't forget.
Yeah. And yeah, we're still around for questions. So if there are any, just come to us. And otherwise, the rest can leave for lunch. Enjoy. Good.